Hello, and a big warm greeting to our attendees, a fabulous group of the brightest and cleverest minds shaping our industry. You've spoken and shEqual have listened. I'm Beck Bridson, and I'm so thrilled and happy to be your MC today. I'm speaking to you all from the Boon Wurrung country, and I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. Shortly, we will have a welcome to country by Aboriginal Elder Auntie Dianne Hill. Now, I know we all have Zoom fatigue, especially if you're from Melbourne, but this topic really does deserve all of our attention. As one of the few female agency founders in Australia, I have been a pioneer and champion of gender equality for 2 decades. For the last 4 years, I've been privileged to be working with WHV since they began this commitment to work on gender, and they're a truly open, supportive and truly collaborative culture working within and alongside our industry. Each year, shEqual has epitomised progress, and it's the result of passionate people with superpowered vision who are brave and purposeful in their action. Because changing the status quo is not for the faint-hearted. To beget change takes equal parts intelligence and resilience. Raising the voices and experience of women in the industry to end sexism is not easy. And yet it's the kind of subject that the smartest people in the industry know that they can turn into the kind of behaviour change campaigns that we can make for our clients. And those people, well, you're with us today. We see you and we support you. Some of your colleagues may be in a client whip, or if they're lucky, they're on a shoot, certainly not on location in Western Australia. But the good news is this session is being recorded and it will be made available after the event. There's also a chat room, and we really strongly encourage you to jump on and join in the conversation. Use it as an interactive place to share your ideas, your thoughts, any questions that are coming up. And of course, if something does come up for you, there are links to support services. So the theme of this event is bold and strong. And when you see the research results, you'll understand why it's being so appropriately named. We're at a tipping point, and we're no longer standing by, we're absolutely pushing forward. Bold and strong is the change that women, and importantly, women's allies want to drive. So I'm going to briefly outline the program for today. We're going to hear from Judy, who is the chair of Women's Health Victoria, followed by Minister Williams. Then we're going to get the golden nuggets of insight that we're all really looking forward to hearing. And watch out, brew and transfer, because we have a much, much cooler panel with 4 absolute champions from this industry. So although today's speakers are from different parts of Australia across different Aboriginal lands, Women's Health Victoria is based in Wurundjeri country. So I would now like to introduce Auntie Di, the senior Wurundjeri elder, to come forward and speak with us.
Thank you. I honour my ancestors and my elders, and I pay homage to all the sacred grounds that we're on. I wish to acknowledge any elders of different nations, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and the First Nations peoples from across the waters, and I acknowledge you all. In particular, I wanted to acknowledge the Honourable Gabrielle Williams, and I wanted to pay my respects to your ancestors, elders and families. Thank you for inviting me today, and I do have a journey with women's health, and I'm so glad that you're looking at gender equality, but I think that goes along with race equality as well. But we need to understand each other and share our stories so that we can live in harmony. I firmly believe if we live in harmony, we can eradicate racism and stigma, and we pave the way for our younger ones. They can walk our streets without fear of any harm. And all it takes is an open heart and an open hand. So I wanted to offer you all my hand in friendship so that we can journey together. May Bunjil, my creators, surround you all and give you strength and resilience. On behalf of my elders, I say Woman Jika, Wurundjeri Balik, Yiman Gundibik. That means welcome to the traditional country of the Wurundjeri people. Welcome you to Wurundjeri country because I'm on Wurundjeri country. For those that you are not on Wurundjeri country, I can't welcome you to that country, but I can acknowledge the country you're on and hope that their ancestors and elders give you strength and resilience as well. I say Nun Godjan, which means thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey today. And I hope that you have some wonderful results and that you have a good webinar. So Nun Godjan, thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Di, for that wonderful welcome to country and those very powerful words. I'm Judy Hacker, the Chair of Women's Health Victoria. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's event. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I am joining from today, also the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and we are the beneficiaries of stolen land and dispossession that began over 200 years ago and continues today. It is now my honour to acknowledge the many wonderful guests in our presence today. I would particularly like to acknowledge the Hon Gabrielle Williams MP, Victorian Minister for Women, Dr Nikki Vinson, the Victorian Commissioner for Gender Equality in the Public Sector, Simone Clark, CEO of UN Women Australia, and Michelle Clark, Acting Director of the Office of Women in the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. I would also like to acknowledge our strategic partner, Respect Victoria. Acting CEO Amy Prendergast is unable to join us today and sends her apologies. Welcome also to our WHV board members and members of the shEqual reference group. For those of you who don't know us, Women's Health Victoria is a non-for-profit statewide health, promotion, advocacy and support service. Improving the representation of women in advertising has been a long-standing priority for us because of the enormous influence of advertising on social norms and attitudes related to gender equality, women's health and violence against women. Given my background in marketing, I've worked with many ad agencies over the years, so I understand the enormous power advertising has to shape attitudes and behaviour. Today's event also marks shEqual's first birthday. Since we launched shEqual a year ago, we have seen incredible growth in the level of interest and engagement in issues of gender equality within the ad industry, including the recent arrival of the UN initiative, the Unstereotype Alliance in Australia. At Women's Health Victoria, we're proud to be playing a leading role in driving this change agenda through shEqual, including through the delivery of training and resources to promote gender equality in advertising and undertaking research to strengthen the case for change. The industry's desire for stronger action on gender equality is clearly reflected in the report we're launching today, which are the preliminary results from the shEqual survey. We were overwhelmed by the response to the survey. It was only open for 2 weeks, but we received nearly 600 viable responses. And that clearly demonstrates a huge level of interest and appetite for action. This incredible response is also thanks to shEqual's many friends in the industry who encouraged their colleagues to complete the survey. The ad professionals who responded to the survey have been very generous in sharing their reflections, insights, and ideas for action. We extend our heartfelt thanks to all of you who shared your experiences through the survey. Because of the large volume of data generated by the survey, we're only able to share a snapshot of the results today, and we hope to share a more detailed report with you in 2022. I'm sure you will agree that the snapshot report makes for very sobering reading, so I'm looking forward to hearing our industry panel's reflections on that report later on. It is now my pleasure to welcome the Hon Gabrielle Williams MP to the screen. Hello, Minister.
Hello.
Gabrielle Williams is the Minister for Prevention of Family Violence, Minister for Women and Minister for Aboriginal Affairs in the Victorian Government and proudly represents her local community as the member for Dandenong. Gabrielle is a passionate advocate for equity and social inclusion and is proud to be a member of Victoria's first ever Gender Equal Cabinet. She's committed to driving an important reform agenda to improve outcomes for women, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and families across Victoria. Minister, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Judy, for that very warm introduction and for setting the scene really, really well. But before I begin, please let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently sitting, which is Bonorong country, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and a special thank you to Wurundjeri elder Ani Kerr, who always gives such a beautiful welcome to country, always so heartfelt and informative, and a real leader, not only within the Aboriginal community, but across the broader Victorian community as well. Her wisdom has helped shape generations. Look, also a big thank you to Women's Health Victoria, Dianne Hill, the CEO, Judy, yourself and the board. I know you also mentioned that we've got Dr. Nikki Vincent here as well, who is doing a power of work as the state's first public sector gender equality commissioner in making sure that the Victorian government starts in its own backyard and improves gender equality outcomes across the public sector, not only in terms of that workforce, but in terms of the work that they are doing, which we know touches the lives of so many Victorians, indeed all Victorians. It's such a pleasure to be with you here to celebrate the first year of shEqual, your first birthday, but also to hear the results from the national survey, which, as we've heard, explored attitudes toward gender equality in the advertising industry and in a, I think, an indication of great hope, suggests great interest within the industry about wanting to address these challenges, which I think is a great opportunity, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. shEqual, I don't need to tell anyone in this room, is nation-leading work, and Women's Health Victoria, along with all the partners involved in this project, should be incredibly proud of the progress that you've made in the last year, particularly, I should say, given the challenges presented by the pandemic, which, as we all know, has made everything that little bit harder. That progress, of course, includes the launch of the Seeing is Believing campaign, a national framework supporting gender equality in advertising, and of course also your work to strengthen the advertising code of ethics. Advertising, as we all know, is hugely important in achieving cultural change, and that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about shifting the dial in attitudes and behaviours towards women that have very tangible outcomes in terms of women's health and wellbeing on a range of factors across our community. I think the partnership represented in this work between government and industry presents a really huge opportunity for us to really make meaningful strides in this work and in meeting our collective objectives, which is why today, before I say a few other things about the importance of this work, I'm keen to announce that we'll be investing a further $275,000 so that Women's Health Victoria and all of your partners can continue driving progress towards gender equality in the advertising industry. We're very proud to continue partnering on this project, and I really look forward to seeing how it continues to evolve, knowing as I do how much it has already achieved and how important this interface is in our broader Victorian agenda in achieving gender equality in all environments, in all spaces, corners, hidden or otherwise across our community, because we need to tackle this issue wherever women are. Look, we know that the way the media depicts women and girls plays a central role in how we understand ourselves and how we understand our role in the home, in our workplaces, and also in our communities and in our economies as well. Every woman has a right to be treated equally with dignity and respect, and to be given the power to influence as well the way that our male counterparts do. And I think it's really vital that advertising reflects this expectation and reflects that aspiration as well. We also know that devaluing women increases the likelihood, sadly, of violence against women at its most extreme end, be it through harmful words, behaviours or sexist jokes, right through to how women are represented in the media. The reality is bad attitudes towards women lead to bad outcomes for women. And as individuals as professionals, as a collective, as a community, we really need to take responsibility for our own words and actions, and we must call out that disrespectful behaviour wherever we see it. And shEqual, I think, is a really important step towards that systemic change that is required, that really underpins and also empowers that individual effort that I know each of us in this virtual room are committed to. We're all here today because we're excited by the positive role that media and advertising can play in sharing diverse, strong and non-stereotypical portrayals of women within the broader community. But while we have come a very long way, I think, in some areas, we also know, though, that there's some advertising that continues to reinforce those outdated gender roles and stereotypes. We still see sexualised representations of women and girls, or of positive or passive sort of roles of domestic mother, while ideal boys and men are often shown as that strong, powerful, successful leader type that we're also familiar with, but we know bears on genuine outcomes and sex expectation for women and or girls and boys in particular, and can fundamentally shape our lives, shape our trajectories and our outcomes, and that needs to shift. These narratives, we know, reinforce those outdated gender roles and stereotypes that were formed in a different time and that really increasingly have no place in the world that we're in today. And we need to see that shift so that we can see those that dial changing in all environments, whether that be in our homes, in our workplaces, in our communities, and of course across our broader structural economic changes as environments as well, that we know need to change to also empower women and girls long into the future. This is such a multifaceted challenge that we are all taking on, but our cultural levers to achieve that change far more quickly really give us, I suppose, our best chance of being able to make those strides in a way that might otherwise be even more challenging than it already is. We spend a lot of time in the Victorian government saying you can't be what you can't see, and of course that's precisely why the media is such a vital frontier for us. That those representations of men and women, boys and girls, making sure that that those representations meet our growing expectations and aspirations for a new Victoria, a new Australia, and indeed this is a global movement to see the dial shifted and to see those outcomes for women start to shift with it in a positive direction. Addressing gender stereotypes is really critical to achieving gender equality and to preventing violence at that most extreme end. It is a spectrum. There is a lot of other disadvantage that sits along that spectrum that we need to be addressing as well. That can be, in its most simplistic form, condensed down to bad stereotypes and negative expectations set from a very, very young age for most of us. That realisation, that knowledge that we need to embed this work as a central part of a government policy agenda is what's led the Victorian government to embark upon the work that it has, a very significant body of work over the last 7 years. Victorian government invested more than $521 million in this year's budget alone to end family violence and progress gender equality, on top of the $435 million from last year, and I could keep giving similar figures for the years prior to that. That's also why we launched Safe and Strong in 2016, which is our state's first ever gender equality strategy, which is designed to start looking at where these levers are that we can pull and working out how we play a meaningful role in structural and systemic change. That strategy identifies media, arts and culture as one of the key settings for change to progress gender equality in Victoria, recognising the media and the arts as powerful sources of not only information, but also culture, also a significant part of the shaping of social norms, of attitudes and of public discourse around gender as well. Safe and Strong is lapsing this year, so we're in the process of developing a new gender equality strategy in 2022, which will outline key priorities for the government in a COVID recovery environment. I think we've got a huge opportunity on the back of COVID, because it has further elevated many of these conversations that most of us will have been having for years, indeed some of us decades, but it has really lifted that into the main frame again, because we know the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women, and it's started to make people ask again, why? And we know the pandemic hasn't caused a lot of these inequalities. It is merely highlighting what was already there, and I suppose proves that because of that inequality was already there, the pandemic was never going to be felt equally. And so I think we've got a real opportunity at the moment in particular to be raising our voices around these issues, where across so many measures, women's disadvantage is being borne out. And I think programs and projects like shEqual are one such opportunity for in our collective effort to lift those discussions and take advantage of the megaphone that we've effectively been handed through the COVID pandemic. I'm a silver linings kind of gal, and so rather than dwell on the negative of this experience of the last year or two, I'm really keen for us to harness the opportunities and carry that forward. Look, breaking down gender stereotypes and taking on significant cultural change takes time. We all know that. But it's so important for the health, wellbeing and prosperity of everyone in our community. I really want to finish just by congratulating Women's Health Victoria and the industry group members on the success of shEqual so far. All of those in the industry who have shown an interest in this, who have poured themselves into this work as well, even if that is just for those who have participated in the survey to actually take the time to put forward your views, understanding what impact that can have when we get that better sense of what people are observing and also what people are wanting moving forward. So congratulations, this is driving such important progress towards a more equal and diverse advertising sector. And of course, it's ultimately about changing a culture that will serve particularly women and girls much better long into the future. This is about generational change and being able to achieve something that has somewhat evaded us up until now. But I'm confident with the powerhouses that we have in this room that we are on the precipice of achieving great and lasting change. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. We're absolutely delighted by this very exciting announcement of additional funding for shEqual and what it means for gender equality in advertising. And I know that everyone here today is thrilled by your announcement. We are grateful for the support of the Victorian Government in making this project possible. And as the survey results show, and you'll see very soon, action on gender equality in advertising is sorely needed. We hope to see the shEqual project featured as part of the next Victorian gender equality strategy, and we look forward to continuing to work with the Victorian Government, our project partners, and the advertising industry for many years to come.
Well, echoing Judy's excitement, it's absolutely thrilling to hear that Minister Williams is going to be providing this additional funding so that we can continue the bold and strong action that's creating momentum via shEqual's powerful work. We know that advertising does have a powerful influence on our beliefs, our values, our attitudes and behaviours. It reinforces gendered ideas about what it means to be a woman or a man and how women and men are valued in our society. This year, shEqual undertook the research to understand where our industry was at. We needed data and we needed to know that the industry could use this data as well. Because advertising influences culture, it means the culture of agencies, brands and industry is actually the place to start making changes from the inside out. So I now would like to invite the Managing Director at Empirica Research, Cassie Hayward, to share the findings. Cassie is also an Associate Professor at the University of Melbourne, and she teaches in the School of Psychological Sciences, teaching the psychology of advertising. Cassie, we are really eager to hear what your research has unearthed, so welcome to the screen.
Thanks for having me, everyone. Just to echo the kind of summary version of this, I'll be spending minutes on topics that we could spend hours on. So I'll give you a top line kind of summary of what we found, but there's lots to get through. Just a quick recap of the methodology. So obviously, to take part in the survey, people had to be involved in the advertising industry. So that was either on the client side or the agency side. And just to give you an idea of how that fell out, so we had 598 participants, almost 600, who took part in the survey. Most of those were on the agency side, so 81% agency side, and a skew towards that 30 to 49 age group. We got a good representation of males and females in the industry, and as reflective of the industry itself, skewed towards Sydney and Melbourne. But I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to get into the results. Just a few notes before I get started. We did have free response options in the survey for people to type their responses as well as make their ratings. And for anyone who's ever done a survey or used survey data before, you'll know that typically people write as little as possible on those free responses. But here it was the opposite. We had lengthy responses that people were typing in, either because of their passion for the topic, but sometimes also their confusion around the topic. So I am sharing more quotes than I probably would in a presentation, because I think it's really useful for you to see how people talk about these issues in their own words. One other issue to point out before I get started is that some of the richest data out of this research was looking at the disparity, but also the agreement between men and women in a lot of these issues. So I will be referring to those categories of males and females throughout the survey, throughout the results. I want to start with just this idea of what does gender equality mean? So we simply ask people to type in a definition of gender equality. And I think it's one of those terms that everyone thinks they know the meaning of until they're asked to type a definition of it. And then we kind of see that people perhaps don't understand the nuance or the technicalities of the issue. But most people landed on some type of definition that encompassed equal opportunity and gender not being a barrier for them. But I think this quote kind of highlights some of the clarifications that people might need, this kind of confusion between equality and equity, and what are we trying to achieve. And I think that's important to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about initiatives that might be called gender equality initiatives. What kind of outcome are we looking for? And just helping people really understand that term. So I want to dive into the main results, starting at a look at workplace culture. So in the survey, we looked at gender issues from two perspectives, one in terms of the culture of the workplaces that people are in, and one from the content of the advertising that's produced. So I'll kind of chop and change today between a look at the workplace side of things and also a look at the content side of things. But of course, those two things are related. So we asked people how strongly they thought the workplace culture that they're in influences the advertising, that content that's produced in that agency. And men and women had pretty strong agreement that the culture has a strong influence on the content produced. And that makes sense if you kind of think about day-to-day life in the agency, having a strong impact on the content. We also asked people whether they thought the industry as a whole prioritises gender equality from both a content and a workplace perspective. And here we see a bit of disparity in the females and males of our survey. Now, it's not as if the males think that it's a hugely important, being addressed in a hugely important way in the industry, but they certainly think it's being addressed to a greater extent than the females in the industry feel that it's being addressed. And we again see this disparity between females and males when we ask them how much they think is being done. So we asked people whether they thought agency management and industry bodies are doing more, less, or about the right amount in terms of addressing gender equality. And here we see that females were far more likely than males to feel that not enough was being done in the space of gender equality. But a really important thing to keep in mind here is that content, culture, and our broader society are intrinsically linked. So we know that advertising content has some influence on society, or we like to think that it has some influence on society, but this is a two-way street. So we also know that society norms and behaviours are reflected in our advertising content. So we've got this two-way link between advertising content and our society. We've also seen that a lot of our survey respondents said that their culture in their advertising workplace has an impact on the advertising content produced. But again, we can see how this is actually a two-way street, not a one-way direction. You can imagine an agency that produces a lot of, I don't know, sports betting or car servicing ads with a lot of unnecessary bikini shots, having that content having some impact on the culture of that agency. So I think that's really important to keep in mind when we think about solutions for gender equality in advertising. And if we look at some of those UK initiatives of regulating content in terms of gender representation, that's great, but it's only really looking at that content side of things and perhaps missing the more systemic workplace culture issues. And it's not to say that changing the content wouldn't have an effect on culture, it would, but it might be more effective to try and address both the content and the culture side of things at the same time. And just to complete the circle, obviously we know that the society from which we recruit employees into the advertising industry has an impact on that culture as well. So this is a circle, and these aspects of content, culture and society are really intrinsically linked. So we can't just look at one specific component in terms of a solution or a regulation and think that it's going to solve the whole problem. I selected a couple of quotes just to highlight some of these culture issues. So this first one was from a male who works in an agency but has worked client side as well. And I'll just read out that the part in the middle there. He's worked in agencies where the leaders routinely harass, make comments and even implement hiring policies based on looks. They joke about it, the industry doesn't hold them to account. And I think one of the saddest things about this quote is that it's probably not a surprise for many who have been in the industry for a while. We had a lot of people in the survey saying that you either learn to put up with stuff like this in the industry, or you find an agency where it doesn't happen. But I think for a lot of people here today, this probably isn't a surprising quote. It's definitely unacceptable and not a great workplace, but it's probably not a huge surprise for a lot of people in the industry. Similarly with this quote, so this is from a female who's been in an agency, and she talks about this idea of not having enough females in those high senior management roles. So where are the CCOs, where are the ECDs, how many mid-level females in advertising quit to go freelance or go client side for better balance? And then also talking about the struggle, the juggle at home as well, in terms of managing households and kids. But I think this highlights that issue of, for many junior women in the industry, that saying of you can't be what you can't see is the reality for a lot of them. Obviously not in all agencies, but certainly in a lot of agencies, we're still missing that strong female representation at the most senior levels. Related to that idea of not having enough females in those senior roles is the issue of pay gaps. And this was something that came up pretty strongly through the survey. But there's a few components to unpack with pay gap. So I want to start with the idea of a within role pay gap. Okay, so we asked people, do you think men are paid more than women in similar roles in your industry? And more than half the men and a much higher proportion of women thought that was the case, that men were getting paid more than women for the similar role types. Now, we obviously don't have any actual data to check this against. There's no advertising industry database of salaries that we can look at. But I think given that level of agreement, let's assume that there probably is some within role pay gap in the industry. But I think the more systemic issue when it comes to pay gaps in the industry is not necessarily just the within role pay gaps, but looking at this role skew of gender. So even in our data set from this survey, we see a high proportion of men in creative, a high proportion of women in client services. In other advertising industry data sets, we see that even to a greater extent. And in those other data sets, we also see management skew towards male, which we don't see here, but we can see that skew in the creative and client services areas. So that's really, I think, the meatier and more interesting, to some extent, side of pay gaps. It's pretty easy to solve the within role pay gap if agencies want to. You run a check on role types and look at salaries, and if there's a difference between the men and women, you can fix it pretty easily. But this issue of the gender skew in those higher paid roles is a much harder fix. And this is obviously not an issue that's unique to advertising, okay? So we see it in medicine with more men in surgery roles, more females in that kind of family practice GP roles. We see it in law with more men in corporate law and more women in not-for-profit. So it's certainly not a uniquely advertising issue, but it's definitely an issue that the advertising industry needs to think about if we're going to think about how to get more women into those higher paying roles. So when people started talking about pay through in the research, there was a lot of talk about how it's in their contract that they can't mention how much they earn. There was a lot of talk about seeing vast and obvious pay gaps. But a lot of the talk was also around this idea of pay audits and transparency and thinking that that would be a good thing for the agency to embrace. So we asked how much support there would be for their employer undertaking a pay audit to identify any gender pay gaps. And there was strong support from the females and the males for the organisations doing some sort of pay audit to see if there is a within role pay gap. But the men were a little bit less convinced that improving pay transparency would solve pay disparity. And the problem here is they're probably right. There's not a huge amount of data on corporate pay transparency because hardly anyone does it. There's a little bit of data on pay transparency in government and academic situations, but not much when it comes to the corporate world. There's a tech company in the US called Buffer, and they have taken transparency to the extreme when it comes to salaries. So there's a website there that you can look at, and they publish all salaries. And I'm not talking about, oh, for these role types, this is the kind of band that you can expect to earn. On that site, you can see every single person's name from the company, how much they earn, and the state that they live in the US or around the world. So don't go and look at it now. Wait till the end of today's session before we go and have a sticky beak at what the people at Buffer earn. But it is extreme pay transparency. And they obviously did it to try and solve this kind of pay disparity issue. And they have said that it has worked really well in that within role pay gap. So in their cases, a female and male software engineer are now pretty likely to be earning the same amount of money. But at an overall level of the company, they still have a 12% gender pay gap. And that's because of this role skew that they also find in terms of gender. So they simply have more men in the roles that earn more money and more females in the roles that don't earn as much money. And the reason I wanted to bring up this case study is that pay transparency is often kind of put forward as this solution to pay disparity. And it can be a great solution for that within role pay gap side of things. But until we figure out the more systemic issue of getting more women into those more senior roles, even with pay transparency, we're still going to have an issue with pay gaps because of that role skew. All right, so I'm going to leave workplace culture for a little while and jump into advertising content, okay? So there was pretty strong agreement that advertising has an influence on society. So people in the industry think that what they put out there it matters in terms of influence on people. There was also, and this might surprise some of you, a pretty strong agreement from men and women that better representation of all genders makes for better ads. So maybe, if nothing else, there's a commercial argument for improving gender representation in ads. There was also, again, strong agreement from the women and the men that things like objectification, over-sexualized images, and gender stereotypes can have negative impacts on the body image issues for women and mental health issues for women. We might wonder why we still see some of the ads that we see today with this kind of level of agreement that sexualization, objectification, and stereotypes have such negative outcomes. But let's take it as a positive that there's at least some understanding of this relationship. But we see quite a drop-off in agreement when we ask people whether those issues of sexualization, objectification, and stereotypes contribute to violence against women. Even from the female respondents, that agreement drops right down. So people either don't know or don't want to know that there is that relationship between those issues and violence against women. Now, it's not a direct cause, of course, but it's a really important downstream contributor to violence against women. So that's something that we might want to work on. Something I found really interesting though is even though there was that really strong agreement that highly sexualized images are bad for women's mental health and bad for women's body image, about half of the women in our survey and more of the men still agree that the saying sex sells is often true. So there's this real disparity between an understanding that sexualization in ads is bad for women in terms of mental health and body image, but then a sense that sexualization is good for selling my product. So that's one of the disparities that I think is going to be really important to work on in terms of correcting some of those misperceptions. So if someone had an issue with either content of an ad or a workplace issue, we wanted to see whether they would feel comfortable speaking up. And what we saw in this first chart, this is the worry about speaking up. So we can see that women are far more worried than men about bringing up some kind of issue, either in advertising content or in the workplace. And the next chart is actual experience of negative consequences. So we can see that some of that, that hesitation that women have about speaking up is probably because they're also more likely to have had a negative experience about speaking up about a gender equality issue. And some of the things they talked about was either being laughed at or in some ways, in some stories, being thinking that led to being overlooked for promotion. But we can kind of understand why then they might be hesitant to speak up in the future. So if speaking up is not necessarily something that is going to happen, what other issues had support? What other initiatives had support? And here we found really strong support for a huge range of different initiatives, from pay audits, reviewing content, reviewing processes, even refusing to work with clients who have a poor record on gender equality. Now we know that it's much easier to kind of tick these boxes in a survey and say, yep, I would support that. And it's a different picture when it comes to actually implementing them. But I think we take this as a really positive result in terms of underlying support for these types of initiatives. But the support dropped off pretty markedly for the males in the survey when we asked about setting targets or quotas for gender representation at senior levels. So there's still that kind of assumption that setting quotas is going to mean less talented people will get the role. But I think what we also need to, what is reflective there in terms of the disparity between the females and the males, is that if we think about that senior level of the advertising industry as a zero-sum game, the men are seeing quotas for more females in those roles as coming after their jobs. So that might explain that drop-off in from the men when it comes to quotas and targets. So we also asked them what's going to improve gender equality in terms of the content of the ads. And for here, it really comes down to pressure from brands and pressure from consumers. So money talks. If the people who are paying for the ads or supporting the brands that are paying for the ads want gender equality, then agencies will do it. And this, I don't think we need another award in advertising. It's not saying that an award wouldn't be a nice thing, but I don't think an award is going to solve this issue. It seems that it really has to be pressure from brands and consumers. If they want it, agencies will do it. When it comes to improving gender equality in workplaces, we've already talked about pay transparency, but the biggest, people thought the biggest result would come from just having more accountability for sexist, bullying or discriminatory behaviour. So getting rid of this idea that we have to kind of excuse bad behaviour because they're creative geniuses or whatever, that we call out bad behaviour and don't let it happen. So getting rid of NDAs, calling out men who behave poorly around women. One thing that came out here though in a lot of the quotes from people who'd worked in Australia, but also in the US or the UK, was they talked a lot about how Australia is quite different in the workplace in terms of gender issues compared to the US and the UK. Oh, and that we're worse, if anyone was confused about the direction of that comparison. So, I mean, we don't want to be seen as this kind of backward, old-fashioned industry from a global sense. So I think this global reputation side of things, of taking gender equality seriously, is actually a really important angle and could help also agencies see the importance of kind of really making some headway in this space. In terms of other workplace issues, a specific issue that came up again and again was the impact of maternity leave, of being a real barrier for women progressing in the industry. And it's obviously not just the 3, 6, 9, 12 months that women take off for the maternity leave itself. It's the ongoing subsequent family demands that then often fall on the women to meet. Now, again, this is one of those issues that has there's no easy fix for this. Even Nordic countries who really encourage men to take that paternity leave or family leave haven't solved the issue of female progression after having families. But that might be a model to consider, that we encourage men to take some time off at that baby stage. For a few reasons. One is it kind of reduces the stigma of taking that leave for the women in the industry, but also from the male's perspective is a really positive thing for them to do, to bond with their kids and have that bonding in the family, highlighting the benefits that it can have for the men to kind of play that role of dad in a more complete sense in those early years. I want to start to wrap up with just a few perspectives of what women and men kind of reflected on when they were talking about what they want from change. And I think when we look at what women want in the industry, it can be summed up as, you know, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, but most importantly, they want to be supported. And specifically, they want to be supported by men of the industry. So they want men to be supporting their kind of gender equality ideas. They want men to speak up. They want men to understand these issues. And from a lot of the experiences and quotes that we got in the survey, this isn't their kind of day-to-day reality in the industry. But one thing that I found really, really, really encouraging from this piece of research is how many men talked about not speaking up, not because they don't agree with it or because they don't think it's important, because they don't really know how to. So they talked about not really knowing how to speak up for women without, they talked about the hesitation of not wanting to speak for women, come across as if they're kind of, you know, coming in and speaking for women, when they're actually intending just to speak up for women. They don't want to come across as this, you know, knight in shining armor who's coming to rescue the damsel in distress. Sometimes they don't know if it's an issue. If there are women in the room who aren't speaking up, they wonder if they've misinterpreted the situation. Now, this is, of course, not to excuse any experiences or cases of harassment or bullying or assault, which we definitely heard about in the survey. But this was more about hopefully the majority of the males in the industry lacking the kind of resources to know how to speak up well. So I think if we can take this as a positive view that men are willing to learn how to be a positive ally and how not to be a silent bystander, I think we can take this as a really encouraging piece of research. Okay, so I want to finish with a quick overview of some stories. Is it good or bad in terms of the big picture? On one side, progress is happening. Okay, it's slow. It might not be as fast as we want, but it's happening. As one person pointed out, it's not as bad as it was in the 70s, so I guess that's a good thing. But we certainly see today more agencies that have female management, more brands that demand gender equality in their content, and just this overall kind of moving with the times improvement in agency land and on client side as well. So we can take that as, you know, progress is happening. This is great. Unfortunately, that progress is marred by the truly terrible experiences by some women in the industry. And from the kind of eye-rolling need to put up with lewd jokes or lewd comments, to being literally introduced to clients as token female, to having their ideas ignored, to having those concerns ignored by HR. But I think the most harrowing response that we read about in the survey was a respondent who talked about her friend and colleague who was sexually assaulted by her significantly older male boss in what he actually described to her as part of a workplace bet to see who would F her first. You can read the words there. Now, thankfully, this wasn't a typical experience, but the fact that that happened and the fact that this side of the slide is full of these really unacceptable behaviours that make for pretty toxic workplaces for women mean that I think the industry still has quite a way to go in terms of owning this issue and working on a solution. So I look forward to the panel discussion to look at some ideas for change in the future.
Okay, thanks, Cassie. I know that there are 11 incredible findings in the report. And I must say that still, even after the massive breakthroughs that we've seen all over our media feeds about gender inequality and harassment, sadly, to see that women are still fearful of negative consequences for speaking up is sobering. But I hope today is a new starting point. And I saw something come up in the chat just now that there are great men in our industry who have started holding other men to account, and 82% of women want this support. So to the audience, what is standing out for you? What was the slap jaw disbelief moment, or what are you high-fiving about? Get into the chat, share your thoughts. We want to hear from you. We are running a little behind, so we'll move into the chat, and as promised, move over, grow and transfer, because now Lyndon Deeth, who is the leader at shEqual at Women's Health Victoria, is going to be joined by 4 industry heavyweights, all with very impressive histories, lived experience and insights. This conversation is going to be bigger than Russell and Todd's egos put together. So let's move into the next meaty part, and Lyndon, over to you.
Thank you, Beck. Hello, everyone. I will be facilitating this panel from Wurundjeri country. I pay my respects to traditional custodians, elders, past and present. I would like to introduce our panel. Our panelists have decided to forgo the traditional bios and opted for telling you in their own words their connection to gender equality and what brings them here today. And we will try and keep this as brief as possible so we can jump into our conversation. So first up, I would like to introduce Jasmine Badir, who's CEO of Enocean Australia and founder of Fuck the Cupcakes. Jasmine.
Morning, Lyndon. Thanks for having me. That was super interesting. So I'll keep it super sweet so we can focus more on the discussion. So I am one of the very few advertising agency female advertising agency CEOs in this country. And I founded, sorry for swearing to you guys, Fuck the Cupcakes in a moment of rage in March 2021. And I've been a huge fan of shEqual, and we've been trying to support shEqual also with this survey because this is hugely important. So I think for me, what I wanted to say to everyone here on the back of this study is that for me, the most important bit will be acceptance of the survey. So change is very simple if we all agree on the facts, and it's very hard to argue with facts. But what we need is, I think, an industry-wide acceptance of the results, in particular from a male perspective, because without that, we won't be seeing any change. So I think the solutions are all here. I don't think we need any further ideas. We can literally execute them if we get the very capable men by our sides involved in the conversation.
Thanks, Jasmine. And next, I'd like to introduce Jim Gall, CEO of Clemenger BBDO Melbourne Group. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Lyndon. And it is a great privilege to be here and to be the sole male on this panel. But as many of you would respect and reflect, I'm in a position of privilege. I'm a male CEO. I'm white. I'm in my late 40s. I went to a private school. I am the epitome of privilege. But you know, this is incredibly important to me, and the reason is it's important and why I think we can create change and how I think we can create change is that when we make it personal, we make it emotional, and that is good. That is a positive experience. I am a father of strong 17-year-old twin daughters. They're breaking new ground every day in sport and in life. I'm a proud husband of an entrepreneurial wife who's forging a bold career path in agriculture, one of the world's most male-dominated industries. And when it is personal, I think, is when we can create change and we make it personal to ourselves. I'm not here to virtue signal, or virtue signal, I should say. I'm here to listen. and to provide a point of view on what I see as the role of positive male leaders who can help enable change. So I'm greatly thankful for this opportunity to talk to these issues. I think the report's fantastic, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Lyndon.
Thanks, Jim. And next we have Katerina Matic. She's a senior creative at Bullfrog and one of the founding members of the initiatives, The Antis. Welcome.
Thanks, Lyndon. Hi, everyone. I'm Katerina. And as Lyndon says, I come to this panel as one of the founding members of the Antis, which is a newly formed initiative for the advertising industry that aims to not only inspire and champion women, but also protect women in the advertising industry. And my area of interest in the gender equality space is advocating for women of colour. I think what we really need to do and ensure when we're making progress for women in advertising, it's not just for white, heteronormative, cisgendered women. I think gender equality means gender equality for all people of all genders, and that is actual true equality. And for me right now, it feels so far away.
Thank you, Katerina. Absolutely. And finally, Laura Nice, co-CEO of OMD. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I am co-CEO and newly in the role 2 weeks. So I'm actually bringing 2 female CEOs to OMD, which is fantastic. And I do it in partnership with my friend and colleague, Sean. So we have 4 kids that we are balancing between us within this business, which is always the daily struggle, but also good fun. My reason for being here is basically how I can keep what we have, which is fantastic within OMD, but is about gender balance. It's about something that we, I think, have made huge strides. And listening to the research, I am an OMD boomeranger. So I have been in Australia, gone back to the UK for 5 years, and then more recently returned. So thankfully, I am seeing huge improvements in the industry, but there's still so much that we can do and so much progress. And listening to the research today is a real eye-opener. The disparity between men and female and attitudes is quite telling, I think, in terms of how much work there is to do. But really, personally, as the driver, is when I picked my daughter up, my 7-year-old, from school and told her about the panel that I was on about gender equality and what that meant and why it was important. She said to me, "Mummy, that's great because I want to be a female priest and girls aren't allowed to be priests. So maybe you can help me do that." And I thought, isn't that wonderful? Because she's already seeing that at the age of 7, that there's certain things that she can and her brother, or certain things she can't do, but her brother can. So we may not change the Catholic Church system today, but I'm hoping we'll make some impact with the advertising industry.
Thank you, Laura. It's good to hear that there are more glass ceilings for your daughter to break. Maybe not exactly following in her mother's footsteps, but still pushing forwards. So we're going to have a more conversational flow today. We don't have a lot of time for discussion, but we'll get right into it. So what I mean by conversational flow is I'm really going to take a back seat to this. Our panelists are well-versed in these issues. They've seen an early draft of our snapshot report. They've been listening to the presentation like everybody else. So I will let them have a conversation between themselves, but we will get started off. So Laura, you mentioned what was standing out for you sort of most for the presentation, that disparity between men and women. Can I ask the panelists, would anybody else like to offer other things that are standing out for them after watching the presentation? Is there something particular that spoke to you? Katerina?
Actually, it was interesting when Laura, you said that these things sort of stood out to you. My sort of take was that when I heard the results of the panel of the research, is that it all kind of felt like not new news to me. And I don't know if that's kind of cynical to say, but it was heartbreaking to hear, particularly that last slide when you listened about the sexual harassment, grooming, bullying, and intimidation that's going on in our industry, and men dominating senior leadership roles and working conditions that don't support mothers. It's sobering to hear, but I'm also not surprised. And I suppose the takeout for me is that it's validating to hear it sort of presented in this way. because I feel like I've either personally experienced this myself within the workplace, or, I've seen it. I've heard the comments when a mother leaves at 5 p.m. to go pick up her kid. Everyone says something discriminatory behind her back when she leaves. And yeah, that's kind of my take out. It feels like, I guess, this open secret that we've kind of unleashed now. And it's this thing we sort of talk about behind closed doors or in anonymous surveys, but we kind of all know what's going on. And yeah, we don't speak about it or can't speak up about it in that space where it really matters, which is in the workplace.
Thanks, Katerina. Jim, do you want to add in?
Look, I think it really stood out to me. I think the figures there were 82% of respondents said they would be very or extremely encouraged by witnessing others speaking up, and if more men were actively supporting gender equality. And I think, demonstrated throughout all of the research, hierarchy and seniority were listed as strong barriers to speaking up about gender equality. And I think that's a significant issue. And I think it is something that we need to improve in respect to cultural competency and in men understanding and having the confidence to understand what are the issues and calling it out when they see it. And then to hear that women are being labelled troublemakers or difficult if they did speak up is intolerable. So I think in the flow of work, in the everyday actions and interactions we have with clients, it's absolutely critical, and with each other, it's absolutely critical that that men feel enabled to speak up, because I think it's only when it's called out immediately that we see a response. I think the really interesting part of this, and it's fantastic to have this research as well as other research that's finally emerging around gender equality, is we talk a lot about the pay gap. We talk a lot about seniority gap with gender equality, but we don't talk enough about the data gap. And it's important, in respect to gender equality. It's important that we have this data for some people, and particularly some men, and we don't want to generalise here. Data is a really important point of evidence to create change. And this data is helpful, and more data that we will get as an industry will help, I think, enable the confidence for men to understand there is a problem, to admit that there's a problem, and the change needs to occur.
Thanks, Jim. Jasmine.
Look, I just want to build on what Jim just said there. So obviously this is a shEqual funded study, which is amazing, but it's really sad to see that we need not-for-profit organizations, government funded, to actually drive this from the ground up, because there's industry organizations and bodies that I would actually want to do some heavy lifting here on bringing us forward, right? So let's be real. This is not the first time that we are hearing these results, but not much seems to change in a structural way. And it's always, the conversation always seems to be around the fact that, but in my organization, I've hired one person, therefore this is not true for me, or I've ticked a box and added it to my website and now a champion of change. So there's a lot of window dressing and decoration going on in this industry because we're really good at it, right? We really know how to market, and we really know how to market ourselves. So I think the conversation needs, so we need pressure from brands on this. And I'm really glad that there's some brands actually doing something about it as well, demanding a change in color, gender within their agencies as well, because they're recognizing also that 51% of their consumers are female, and also don't necessarily come from the privilege that, white Eastern Seaboard Australian advertising agencies come from. So we need that push from clients. Then we need the industry bodies on board to support this at the same time. And then we need to engage male C-suite and get them to do this with us together, so that the conversation is not just one where women are running around with their hair on fire and holding up studies to go, look at the results, right? So we just need everyone to accept it and buy in.
Thank you, Jasmine. Another question that came out because of what came out very strongly in the survey, and is often not part of the conversation, is that connection between the content and the workplace culture. So 2/3 of respondents, 67%, said that advertising industry and workplace culture have a very or extremely strong influence on the advertising content that the workplace produces. And this was an even stronger agreement for women and those aged under 40 to feel that the culture had such a strong influence on the content. What does this finding mean for you? Katerina, you're in creative?
I'm at the coalface. I'm making the content. Yes. And yeah, I agree with the respondents. The workplace culture 100% influences the work we create. Because at the end of the day, what we're doing with advertising is we're telling stories. And when we create these stories, it's actually quite subjective in the way we create them. So yes, there's a brief and there's a business objective we need to answer, but how we decide to actually express that answer, we put a little bit of ourselves in it. So who we choose to put at the center of our stories, how that character is written, what cultural understandings and social cues we're tapping into, it's all subjectively decided in that sort of creative process. So I think that if a workplace culture champions only a certain type of person, then only a certain type of story gets told. And that's how we kind of get these really narrow depictions of women in advertising. It's the same type of person with the same type of worldview keeps repeating that same type of story about women. You know, women are homemakers, we're mothers, we're people pleasers, we're pretty, we're hairless, we're passive, we look perfect all the time. And although I think like one ad portraying that certain type of woman is not particularly harmful, it's just when there's many of that same thing reinforcing over and over again that that's all we can be and that's all we are. I feel this is very limiting. I also think that it's not enough to kind of tick a box when we're creating content. For example, just adding a woman to our ads and our stories to fill a quota, or, you know, writing a woman of color into a script as an afterthought when we're like casting for that role. I think this is very, you know, tick, I've made the ad inclusive, and feels very tokenistic. So I think what needs to happen is that, yes, workplaces need to hire diverse people, but they also need to foster these inclusive environments where people of all genders, and that's people of color as well, feel empowered to be themselves. And I think that will naturally bring more diverse stories to tell, and will in turn produce content about women that's more inclusive and authentic.
Sorry, I just had a rare phone call coming in. Thank you, Katerina. Now, our CEOs, have you ever thought about, is that something that's come up for you strongly? So Katerina can see it every day within her work, but for leading an organization and thinking about, workplace culture and strategic change, do you think about that with a connection with the content that you do? Does that come into how you approach your work?
I might jump in there, Lyndon. Absolutely, and I think what we're often talking about here is having, to use the term Katerina made before around casting. I mean, casting of our own teams is absolutely critical in achieving these diverse outcomes in the content. So it's really, it's really interesting when you look at often our RFP responses or tender responses or pitch responses to clients. Some of the acknowledgements at the bottom need to express our policies around sustainability or privacy or modern slavery, all of these sort of mandatory requirements. But then, when we talk about the casting of our teams and the gender equality within our teams, it's actually not written in. So there's a responsibility here, I think, from both the creative agencies, but also the clients to say, look, we're mandating this. In order to get the work that we want, the diverse work that reflects society and shapes culture, we need you to play your role as well as an agency. So I think it's a dual responsibility of both, obviously the agency in what they do philosophically, culturally and structurally. But I think there's certain things that we can do from a structural perspective on the client side to change it as well.
And I think I just want to build on that, Jim, as well, because you're obviously talking more creatively about content, but then coming from a media agency, we also have a responsibility to play in terms of when we're looking more holistically beyond just the content itself. Who are the partnerships that we're going to? And I saw someone talk about radio presenters, you know, are we then partnering our brands with media partners that represent, you know, equality, not just gender, but, you know, background, but also, you know, the representation of our teams. It was really interesting when Cassie was talking, I was like, we have a gambling client, we have a makeup client, we have such diverse clients, but do we have diversity of gender within clients, you know, or do the boys work on the gambling client and the girls work on the makeup client? And I think kind of almost getting quite forensic within the business is actually where you start making a difference. And you also get diversity of thinking as well, because it's quite, or I guess more simple to look at it at a macro level of agency diversity. But I think the real impact comes when you get into the granularity of how we are interacting and representing with our clients.
Thanks, Laura. Jasmine, do you want to weigh in on that?
I've got some really strong points of view. Obviously, the entire media industry, broadcast, you know, there is some reach trumps morality every single time. So you look at some TV formats that we have where we're perpetuating awful gender stereotypes that also do nothing good for men. So that in itself, we could do another, shEqual can do a whole another study on that bit. But I think our responsibility is actually also to not let our senior leaders in our own companies get away with lazy responses, as in, we wanted to find a woman for this team, but they are not there, right? So then we need to get into the conversation around quotas. And then we also need to get into a conversation around merit, because there is always this, I know this from experience from conversations, men believe they got there on merit, but they do not want quotas. So does that mean then that the women aren't good enough? And you're therefore then also feel now like you will have a privilege being taken away and now you feel disadvantaged. So that's a really, really complex conversation that we need to tackle internally. And I think it's our responsibility to unpack that and telling everyone that this will have to be the future, right? Because we need to have a starting point in getting women into these roles. And for that, we need to change therefore the criteria as to what we're hiring for. We need to always say we can't look for proof. We need to look high with opportunity, right? See whether the person could do the job because this person didn't have the opportunity to work on the same campaigns as some of the boys potentially would have had. So that in itself is like a really, really big topic that I feel quite strongly about. And I think we see that in the study.
We do, Jasmine. Cassie highlighted a quote that had come out from a man, relatively young man under 30, who responded, he felt the need for a clearer narrative on what gender equality means. That equality in the classic sense of equal opportunity, or is it equality of outcomes? And that they felt that this was complicated, messy, and political. And that we saw that come out again and again in the survey and people's comments, as well as when they made their definitions for what gender equality meant for them. This focus on the equality of opportunity. That 46% felt that gender equality meant equality of opportunities, not the outcome, not who gets at the end, that everything is offered at the beginning. And Jasmine, you've raised some of the complexities around that. Does anyone else want to reflect or comment on that? How that maybe is not clear for people, that can be where there might be some backlash or resistance that come up when they don't understand when there are gender equality initiatives, that difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcomes.
I just want to build on what Jasmine said. I think it's really interesting. My boss asked me a couple of months ago what my take on hiring quotas was, and at that time I said to him, I think I'd feel really weird if I was hired based on my gender and my race, right? That it was just an equality hire and I really want to be hired for my merit. But I was kind of digging into this idea a little bit more, and I think we forget when we say hiring based on merit that some people, it's not an equal playing field. So I think I can see how men might feel a bit worried if we're meeting quotas and hiring based on merit, but I think they're forgetting the privileges that actually brought them there to that point, and that it's no coincidence that you have access to that role at that time. And I think, if your workplace is filled with men and you feel like you need, and there's a man and a woman who you could hire, and they're both the same, both talented, I think the woman brings she brings an extra point of view and an extra skill. I think we should look at it as a skill, I guess. And same goes the other way. If most of your team is filled with women, you don't have that male perspective there. So again, if you're presented with a male and a woman, both at the same level of talent, that man's going to bring a different perspective, and that's a skill that you're bringing into the workplace. So yeah, I've kind of gone round with my thinking, but it's a very interesting topic to unpack for sure.
If I can add to that, it's interesting. We actually we've launched a 12-month inclusivity D&I inclusivity program at OMD, and I was on one of the sessions yesterday, and Juanita Bonney, who is kind of giving us some of this information to really test us and to challenge us in our thinking, was saying yesterday about how we should be looking less at competencies when we're recruiting and more about people's value system. And I thought that was really interesting, because I was like, we always look at competency because we need someone to come in and hit the ground running and start the job. And that can sometimes, as you're saying, it can be maybe a more privileged individual who has had more opportunity. So they get in based on that opportunity. Whereas actually, if we put that to one side and started to recruit based on their value system that's aligned to our ambition as a business and what we truly believe in, then actually maybe that would bring a different type of person into the business and ultimately change the culture or improve the culture, depending on where you are, for much more longer term retention and diversity of thinking within the business.
Laura, do you think that would be hard to put into place?
That was the exact question I said yesterday. I said, sounds wonderful. How do I get started? And sensibly, she was saying, this is about transition. It's like today, everything is about making a small step forward and not feeling overwhelmed by that. So, do you look at recruiting 20% based on a value system and 80% on competency, and then in 6 months to 12 months, you change that to 50-50, and then you move it to 80-20. But, she was saying the younger generation of people coming through are looking for purpose. They're looking for companies where their values are aligned with them. And it's interesting because that then challenges gender inequality, because we're actually measuring and having different conversations with people. So I think that gives us a way in, and also where we're looking at the more junior members, the assistants that are coming in without having as much experience. That can also be another way to bring people back in on values, but it's something that we're exploring at the moment.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, Jim?
Just to build on that, Laura, this is the long term. This should be seen as short and immediate term issues to address, but also longer term strategies. Because I think as people come in, we can set quotas, but it's not necessarily setting people up for success. And I think this is critical that we're helping women be great at their jobs. And I think as we work towards those quotas, if indeed that is the right thing that some organisations want to do or need to do, then let's make it successful for everyone. And hanging people out to dry, particularly in a tough labour market, where decisions might get made, the immediacy of making a decision to fix a quota issue may undermine the whole strategy. So I think both options, a long-term strategy as well as short-term actions and appropriate cultural education is critical in getting the outcomes you need.
Sorry, go, Katerina.
I agree with you, Jim. I think it's not enough to hire diversely and kind of call it job done. I think workplaces need to be accountable for actually nurturing women's careers and what are they doing to retain them in the workforce. How are they modeling to young women that they can make it into leadership roles? How are we supporting women so that they feel like they can be mothers and balance that, work-life balance? And I think that's that's something we need to work on for sure.
When we have only one of us in the room, we can't leave these people by themselves. We need to make sure that they have a program around them so we can set them up for success and not failure, obviously. I think if you imagine, being a Black woman is even harder, right? Or being any kind of minority in any room where you're then being left alone and you're just like the token person we've just hired, so good luck, all the best to yourself. I mean, that would be horrendous. So I think we have to do it as we have to have many programs around that. And we also got to be a lot better at extending the ladder down, right? As leaders in organizations, how do you nurture those people through, get them to the confidence level where they feel they're ready for a leadership position? It's tricky.
Yeah.
Well, Jasmine, it's absolutely right. And I think when you're talking about where they cross over, where diversity crosses over, when we talk about ableism and we talk about ethnicity and we talk about sexual orientation, I mean, all of a sudden, the issue becomes amplified. This is not just a gender issue, by itself. When there are other diversity issues at play or opportunities at play, it becomes pretty complicated. And so I think this discussion is an important one about gender equality. But as we look more deeply into our diversity and inclusion strategies longer term, it gets pretty interesting.
Thanks, Jim. Now we have just about 3 minutes left in our panel discussion. So in closing, first I want to thank you all, but if you'd like to share with us how you plan to use the insights from today to create a bold and strong action moving forwards to promote gender equality. Or if you want to say anything else in the closing remarks, it's up to you. I hand it over.
Who's going first?
Go ahead, Jasmine.
Okay, well, as a raving supporter of shEqual, obviously we've got to make sure that as many people as possible actually take this study. So as you know, I'm personally also a part of the Ad Council Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So I'll be making sure that this is also being heard loud and clearly. But I think the biggest opportunity that we have is working with our male colleagues. And getting them to understand that they are part of the solution. So it's not me because I raped anyone and I'm not a horrible person and I'm a good guy, there's a lot of gray space in between. And we'll be focused on specifically on getting male sort of middle management motivated to speak up and work with them so they feel part of it. I think male ownership is hugely important here.
So male middle management speaking up. That's great, Jasmine. Laura?
I've actually referred to what Dianne Kerr was saying at the beginning, which was we need to understand each other and share our stories. And what I think this research does is give us an incredibly powerful platform to have the conversation. And that can be one-on-one in mentoring. And for me, advocating mentoring is really important in terms of supporting all people within the business for their next leadership journey, but also to understand those stories truly. And I think unpacking that as individuals and as groups, but also harnessing a culture of inclusivity where no one feels afraid to say something wrong because they might be judged. So I will absolutely be taking this and singing loudly and proudly across the OMD network within Australia and beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Katerina?
Yeah, my bold and strong action that I would like to take is taking action into my own hands. So I strongly believe in the power of mentorship. So women who've progressed their careers in spite of all those barriers that we've heard about today. I just think they have such amazing wisdom to impart to other women. So that's why I'm a proud member of the Aunties. So through our initiative, we're creating a network of women who've kind of like seen it all, been through it all, and just want to help other women by passing on this knowledge. So preparing young grads who don't know what the industry is actually like, or preparing women who want to become mothers but haven't seen it modeled in their workplace. We're banding together as women to share these ideas and strategies, basically for how to advocate for yourself in this industry. And yeah, we're taking it into our own hands. And I would say that would be my bold action. And just to kind of close it off, I think at the start of this panel, I spoke about how the research findings felt like it was not new news and this open secret. I would love the findings now to be that enabler for us to kind of drop that secret part. You know, it's out in the open. We've done the research, we've collected the evidence. We have a problem, and I think acknowledging that is the first step to sort of fixing it. And so I really hope the findings encourage workplaces to not only invest in diverse talent, but foster like inclusive environments that support all women, women of colour, diverse, non-binary folk and marginalised genders as well, so that we can all thrive.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katharina. Some good words. Jim?
Being the last person is most uncomfortable. I'm very conscious of the man having the last word here, so just disgraceful, really. But look, I just want to make a pledge and a comment in respect to men out there, and I think to all of the men in our industry, my advice is to make it personal. Data is important, and you know there are many gender data gaps that need to be filled, but data can also be cut in many ways to validate a position. I think it's very, very important we understand that. That's why the qual in this is so good. The commentary, I think, is so rich. So when you make, you know, gender equality personal, that is, you know, a true commitment to yourself, your colleagues, and your family about what is right and what is wrong and what needs to change, then I think change is more likely to happen. It's more emotionally charged, and you are more inclined to make action happen. So, you know, let's ensure we fix the gender data gap. Let's fix the pay gap. Let's enable men to be more culturally competent and be greater advocates of women. And let's see representation of women a mandatory part of the tender process and the work that we do. I think they're all things that can make change very quickly.
Thanks, Jim. And don't worry, you will not have the final word. We're going to give that to Beck Bridson. So I'm going to close off the panel today and hand over to Dianne Hill, the CEO of Women's Health Victoria. Thank you, everyone. And Dianne will be giving a more formal thank you to all our panelists. It was a great discussion.
Thank you so much, Lyndon, Laura, Jasmine, Jim and Katharina, for an absolutely fascinating discussion. I'm still just sitting here processing so many of the things that you said and trying to create a little summary of them all. We absolutely appreciate you generously sharing your time and insights with us. While recent events and reports tell us that the advertising industry is not unique in grappling with issues of gender inequality and discrimination, it is in a powerful position to affect change, both for the people who work there and in the advertising it creates and commissions. There were so many insights from our great panel. Here are a few highlights I picked out, but I'm sure you can all reflect on what you heard and what you can take from it to affect change. I think an open secret unleashed. Yes, it's an open secret unleashed. We now have the data. We can use this as an enabler. What a fantastic way of turning this into a positive. Men need to feel enabled to speak up and call out bad behaviour. Everyone needs to accept and admit there is a problem and then commit to taking action. I think that's really important. We have to accept that there is actually a problem. It's sad that we need a not-for-profit organisation to be leading this work. The industry needs to stand up and do the heavy lifting. Great shout out there for the industry to really take ownership of leading themselves through this issue. There's a lot of window dressing. We need real action and structural and cultural change. And I think that, you know, we need to be holding people to account and really evaluating whether these things are making a difference. It's not just a tick the box exercise. And I really liked that culture and content is just so linked. We tell stories based on our experience and perspectives. The more diverse experience and perspectives, the broader the narratives that you can all draw on to create content. So it's authentic and reflects real people. That was really compelling for me. You also, and then to need to embrace the full range of diversity inclusion issues. Gender equality is a good start, but representing all women is important, and representing a broader gender diversity, LGBTQI, and all of the other non-binary groups is also important.
Our organisation's values can drive change and attract new and different voices into our industry, but this change needs to be slow and incremental. Short, medium and long-term change so that the change is sustainable and embedded. And I think the other one, we need to support women to be successful. Think about how we're nurturing them, how we create work-life balance, how we support them in their leadership journeys. We need more than one woman in the room. They can't be just a token woman. We need, the biggest opportunity is to work with male colleagues. They are part of the solution, and males need to own being part of the solution. We want to understand each other and share our stories. We have a powerful platform now for having conversations. And taking action into my own hands, mentorship, wisdom to share, and modelling what is possible through the aunties. And finally, make it personal. True commitment to yourself, your family, and everyone else you work for, emotionally charged to take action, will bring about great change. Before we finish, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to Cassie, Hannah, and the team at Empirica Research for their hard work helping us design the survey and analyse the amazing results, and for joining us to present the findings today. I would also like to extend special thanks to our panellist Jasmine Badia and her team at Inishin and Fuck the Cupcakes for all their support and assistance promoting the survey, and to everyone who shared the survey and who will share the snapshot report. Thank you also to our founding partners for this project, Our Watch, Respect Victoria, the City of Melbourne, RMIT University, Venus Comms and the Shannon Company, and our industry partners, Clemenger Group, OMD Initiative, Marmalade, Hester and O Media. A huge thank you to all the members of our industry reference group. You continue to contribute so much to this project. And of course, enormous thank you to Beck Bridson for bringing so much energy and passion to her role as MC for today's event, and a wonderful champion of gender equality over so many years. Finally, I would like to thank the team at Women's Health Victoria, in particular Lyndon, Anne and Misha, as well as those from across the organisation who have pitched in to help with this wonderful event. As is so often the case at Women's Health Victoria, this has been a great team effort. The report shows us there's still a long way to go to achieve gender equality in advertising, but there's a strong desire for change. With thanks to the Minister for Women and the Victorian Government, today's funding announcement means we can continue the bold and strong journey together with all of you. We look forward to doing more in-depth analysis of the data and continuing to work with all of you and the broader industry to drive bold and strong action on gender equality, which is what the survey tells us those working in the industry want to see now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dianne. So in the remaining 29 seconds, I'm going to talk faster than the voiceover artist with too many T's and C's at the end of a retail radio ad. What you need to do now, audience, the summary of the results are being emailed. A recording of the webinar will be available to you shortly. Get on social media, follow shEqual on Instagram and on LinkedIn. Post the snapshot report, highlight it in your media feeds. Use the hashtag shEqual and the hashtag bold and strong. Take the pledge on their website, make your agency do it as well. Fill in the short feedback survey. Let us know what you enjoyed, what you need from us. We need to know, so please share whatever your thoughts are to help us help you navigate. And with just seconds remaining, the theme for today, bold and strong, does reflect what we saw in the research. It reflects the industry that we're in, the momentum that we're generating. All of us here today who refuse to stand still or be quiet. All of us who are ready to see the industry fulfill its potential and be an inspiring and safe place to work and create. Thanks everyone for attending. Go be bold, go be strong. Thank you.